where is it? Now let's get to Isaac Chotiner. Okay. Isaac motherfucking Chotiner did an interview, this time about liberalism. The interview on the New Yorker. This time, Isaac Chotiner has put his crosshairs on the legal scholar Cass Sunstein, arguing for a more expansive definition of an ideology under threat. Now, liberalism is already dead. Okay, for those of you who don't know, Isaac Chotiner is the New Yorker's very own pit bull, an attack dog. I can't figure out what his worldview is, but it doesn't matter. No matter who's in the crosshairs, he is going to slice him and dice him. Okay? It's usually always a worthwhile read. Do you read all these interviews, or are you learning as you go? I read pieces of it, but it doesn't matter because we're in for a wild journey no matter what. For several decades, Cass Sunstein has been one of the most prominent and prolific legal scholars in the United States. A one-time faculty member at the University of Chicago Law School, Sunstein co-authored with Richard Taylor the 2008 book Nudge, which advocated for government policy that pushed citizens to make certain decisions without restricting their choices. One example, asking people who are getting their driver's licenses whether they would like to be organ donors rather than leaving them to sign up for it on their own. The next year, Sunstein joined the Obama administration. He ran the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, which essentially made him government's chief overseer of federal regulations. Sunstein, a friend of Obama from their time in Chicago, was initially the subject of right-wing conspiracy theories that painted him as an overzealous nanny state enforcer. But he ended up disappointing progressives who thought he was too deferential to the free market. Sunstein has written a new book called On Liberalism, which is a defense of the idea of liberalism at a time when Sunstein believes it is under threat from both the right and the left. The book barely mentions Donald Trump or contemporary politics, however, and instead provides a defense of general liberal belief system. Sunstein's conception of liberalism is quite capacious. It includes New Deal liberals and so-called classical liberals, including, I'm going to get to the flotilla after this, okay? I'm going to get to the flotilla after this. Guys, when stuff like this happens immediately, what do I always tell you? Okay? We're going to wait. We're going to wait for now, and then we're going to get to it after, okay? We're going to wait for more information to come in. Including Frederick von Hayek and Robert Nozick, as well as politicians such as Ronald Reagan. Recently spoke with Sunstein, currently a professor at Harvard Law School, about the book and our current political moment. During our conversation, which has been edited for length and clarity, we discussed how to understand the origins of the conservative movement, his confidence that the Supreme Court is committed to liberal ideals, and his friendship with a man whom many liberals consider a war criminal, Henry Kissinger. You have chosen to write a book about liberalism at a time when liberalism is under threat without really talking about what those threats are. It's more of a positive case for liberalism. Why'd you decide to write this particular book? Partly it's temperamental. Probably that's the fundamental answer. To say that there are these people and they have names and they are doing and saying awful things would be, for me, unpleasant. Even if it's the president, even in the event that it's the president. That's right. I feel a little bit that it would date the book and cheapen the analysis if I was calling out the president or calling out some contemporary prominent person. But I think the more fundamental and more truthful answer is talking about the president makes me grumpy, and talking about John Stuart Mill or John Rawls makes me the opposite of grumpy. So the conversation starts off on a positive note. It's friendly. Let's take a look at where it goes and where it unwinds to. Liberalism refers to many things. What liberalism are you talking about in the book? This is not liberalism of the left and not liberalism of the neoliberal sort associated with a particular set of right-wing views, but instead a commitment to freedom, pluralism, and the rule of law. This, in my opinion, is the dying breath of liberalism and neoliberalism in general. And there are a bunch of thinkers who have made all of their money and made all of their prominence off of defending these institutions, defending these concepts, who are now trying to desperately either rebrand or defend it on principle. One example of this is abundance, right? The abundance book, to me, represents a new way, a new method of defending neoliberalism, defending liberalism in general, and trying to do it in a way where you're like adding not necessarily new conditions, but like a new patina, right? Because even liberals themselves understand that this monoculture is destined for doom and despair. It's over. People are moving away from it. Okay. And unfortunately, Many people are not just moving away from it, but they're moving in the direction of fascism, fascist mechanisms of control, rather than moving away from it towards a new evolution of the economy, one that actually analyzes the class contradictions and one that actually seeks to have more egalitarian outcomes for all on the basis of class, rather than other sectarian identity metrics, color, creed, religious background, ethnicity, nationality, and the like. Unfortunately, due to the endless conquest that liberals have engaged in against their left flank, they have designed this environment where fascism can thrive. Let's continue. That's the holy trinity of the liberal tradition. Freedom has crashed out, most importantly in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of religion, but it also includes private property. Pluralism is our currency. It also means respect for people who have diverse ethnicities, diverse religious convictions, and diversity in their sense of what kind of life is good. Even though the book isn't about liberalism in the sense of modern American political liberals, it did seem that you were both trying to explain why you have some sympathy with that form of liberalism, but also that when it comes to a larger tradition, you have affection and respect for a much broader category of liberals. Is that accurate? It's completely correct. I almost called the book Big Tent Liberalism, which means a form of liberalism that includes Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama, and that includes Mill and Robert Nozick, who was a libertarian. It is a wide range of people who intensely disagree with each other. And that is what the book is fundamentally celebrating, the liberal tradition that unites these diverse figures. What surprised me in the writing is that I spent much of my career arguing with right-of-center liberals and being skeptical of some of the views of Hayek, or people who I would call overenthusiastic free marketeers. But doing the book, I came to see them as brothers and sisters. The fundamental values that they speak for are ones I'm honored to share. And in time, when illiberal and anti-liberal thinking is riding high, to see free marketeers, the anti-government liberals, as allied in their insistence on freedom, pluralism, and the rule of law is, I think, a step forward. Yes, you wrote recently, once upon a time I regarded Hayek, Ludwig von Mises, and the Austrians, and also Robert Nozick, Murray Rothbard, and the libertarians with respect and admiration, but in important ways as adversaries. They were not, I thought, on my team. I no longer think that. I think they are on my team, or much better, that I am on their team. Every single person demonstrated here, from Mises to Hayek to especially Rothbard, are fucking freaks, by the way, which I assume Isaac Chotiner is going to bring up. I did see some of the statements that he made. Okay? Like, they are, like, Rothbard, for example, is the one who coined the term baby marketplace, if you want to understand how fucking insane they are. Okay? Rothbard believed that there should be a marketplace of children where parents can volunteer their children in the marketplace of babies to ensure that children are sold to the highest bidder. A commitment to market economics to such a degree that he believed in his mind that if parents were to sell off their children, the parties with financial power to purchase them would actually do a better job of raising them. Okay? Also known as child trafficking, for the record. That's just what we know it as. Yeah. Hayek also had a number of different racist opinions. Anyway, let's move on. I'm sure they'll get brought up. And of course, you talk about Reagan. One thing I thought you were trying to do was bring the fathers of modern conservative movement, or the modern conservative movement for 2016, into the tent of liberalism. Is that accurate? I did an op-ed on the New York Times on liberalism in 2023, and I got a stream of notes from people who are right of center, one of whom is a very distinguished academic who said, I am a liberal and I'm a conservative. Liberalism is what I want to conserve. I worked as a young lawyer in the Reagan administration. I didn't vote for Reagan. I served him as best as I could, with alarm at some of the things he did and appreciation for others. That's all you need to know, by the way. Why did a guy who worked as a lawyer in the Reagan administration get a prominent place in the Obama administration is a question one must be asking themselves. And in some ways, that is because this person is honest, because they're both fucking liberals, okay? Obama and Reagan alike. So in some ways, this book is correct. It's just that the defense of liberalism is ultimately incorrect. But in retrospect, for the Reagan people, at least in the year I worked there, which was the first year, the rule of law was bedrock. So in the Justice Department, we told the White House that certain things weren't lawful and that they couldn't do them. Instead of fighting, they said, well, let's do something else. I've had a love-hate relationship with Hayek, maybe more like love skepticism, kind of like a romance that isn't going to work. But now the love is in a big font and the skepticism is in a smaller font. Many of the people on the left really don't like him at all. But part of my fondness for Hayek was fueled by a book he wrote about John Stuart Mill. It's really a collection of letters between Mill and Harriet Taylor, his wife. Some of these letters are from before they were married. It's kind of scandalous, and Hayek was really into it. There's a lot of passion there. That makes me love Hayek. Also, it's a book about freedom. Why would he do the book? It's a book about freedom between two people who loved each other. Hayek talked about disliking Near Eastern students because they were fundamentally dishonest. He said that he had a profound dislike for the typical Indian students of the London School of Economics, which I admit are all one type: Bengali moneylender sons. I didn't know about that. Wow. Hayek was a very complicated figure. He wrote a lot. Some of it's not so good. The Hayek that I admire is the Hayek who was an extremely persistent and repetitive and powerful critic of socialist planning on the ground. Like, this guy literally goes, oh, he's a racist? But guess what? He fucking hated socialism. Oh, he's a racist, but he was a profound anti-socialist. And guess what? I really like the anti-socialism, so I can totally overlook the profound racism, which once again begs the question, who's in the fucking tent? Okay? Who's in big tent liberalism? Because it seems to me like racists are in the big tent liberalism as long as they are anti-socialist. Kind of feels like a lot of liberals who associate themselves with the moniker, especially at this point, and I don't mean just like people who go, I'm a liberal, I'm a Democrat, who gives a fuck, whatever. I'm not talking about the average normies. I'm talking about the thinkers, right? I'm talking about party politicians. I'm talking about people who engage in commentary, right? Like professional media broadcasts and things of that nature. A lot of those guys exist within the confines of what is allowed in liberal ways of thinking, okay? And that consistently moves further and further to the right. It expands further and further to the right. It never expands to the left. There is a point that it does not go beyond. Once you start talking about class politics, you're out. They'll allow you to speak. They'll allow you to say your piece, but they will never agree with you, but they will never align with you. They will, however, align with people who are increasingly to their right, as long as they too can unify under the banner of anti-communism and anti-socialism. This is the reason why America has eviscerated its left flank. This is the reason why the socialist alternative is never represented in society. And that's why a lot of liberals are now looking around going, why the fuck can't we deal with these goddamn fascists? What's happening? These guys are racist. I'm not racist. I'm a free market guy. I don't like all the additional racist shit that these guys are presenting. And they're winning. Why are they winning? Because all the fucking free market guys and all the liberals that are supposedly in the middle of this monoculture, okay, have spent every waking moment completely shutting off their left flank. And when I say socialist alternative, I don't mean it in a trot way. Please stop. Okay? I'm just saying that the alternative to capitalism is socialism, presenting it as an alternative. I don't mean it as like the trot way, okay? Calm down. Every time someone has to fucking, every time I say that, someone has to turn around and be like, what are you, a trot? Let's continue. The Hayek I admire is a Hayek that is who was an extremely persistent and repetitive and powerful critic of socialist planning on the ground, that it couldn't be made to work because the socialist planners won't know enough, even if they're competent and well-motivated. And also the Hayek who would occasionally say that liberty has an economic foundation, but also a moral foundation. And in a time like ours, Hayek as Mr. Liberty, that's someone who we want to be in the same club with. And here we go. Hayek supported the 1973 coup in Chile. There are lots of things that don't make sense, that don't make him seem like such a Democrat or liberal, correct? Now, for the record, this is neoliberalism through and through. Neoliberalism does not actually oppose the regulatory body interfering in the events of the normal the free markets. Okay, neoliberalism absolutely does not abhor any kind of regulation coming in. Neoliberalism has historically preferred dictatorship as long as said dictatorship is allowing private enterprise to thrive. Okay, that's what's so different. That's what a lot of people don't understand about neoliberalism. Like, well, they say, like, Democrats, you're considering the Democrats to be neoliberal, because at times Democrats will offer subsidies, for example, or Democrats will offer the public-private partnership. Democrats are simply the left flank of neoliberalism, as opposed to the Reaganite right wing that is the right flank of neoliberalism. Okay? Ultimately, as long as the corporate dictatorship structure remains, both parties are perfectly fine with that. Okay? And they spend every waking moment preserving that system. Remember that. A lot of people fundamentally misunderstand it, and they think like neoliberalism is like a different version of libertarianism, which I guess you can make an argument for. I understand that. But the major difference here is that as long as there is a strong government that props up industry, okay, that takes away from the functions of good governance that would normally exist, okay, that rich capitalists consider to be too much market regulation, or the government actually outcompeting the market forces, for example, things like, government-funded programs, public schooling, or even nationalization of the extraction industry in its entirety, or even different sectors within the extraction industry, whether it be oil and gas or whether it be forestry service. These sorts of things can never be controlled by the government. They must be given to private enterprise. And once it is given to private enterprise, then of course the government can intervene at the behest of private enterprise through subsidies, through tax cuts, through deregulation. Anyway, so he brings up Hayek supporting the coup in Chile against Salvador Allende. Democratic Socialist Salvador Allende wins favors within Chile, wins the crowd, wins democracy. Democracy is thriving. Obviously, the American government does not like that. The American government despises it. The American government tries to intervene to the best of their ability. They got the Chicago Boys. They bring a bunch of Chilean economists, and then they send them back to Chile, and they're constantly intervening in the democratic wishes of the Chilean population being addressed by its popular representation. Okay? All of this inevitably leads to a direct intervention in the form of a military coup in the hands of in the hands of Pinochet against Salvador Allende. It also happened on 9/11, but in 1973. So the criticisms are either accurate or in some sense fair. So when I say Hayek is a great figure or a great part of the liberal tradition, I don't mean to endorse everything he said. You mentioned Murray Rothbard as another figure on your team. He was also controversial. He talked positively about David Duke's 1992 presidential campaign. And he said he didn't even bring up the baby marketplace. Come on, Isaac. But this is true as well. And he said that he wanted to replace America's government with some sort of anarcho-capitalism. Given where our politics are at now, it doesn't seem like a coincidence that so many of these figures were important for the conservative movement. How do you think about that? Rothbard is not my favorite by any means. Does he belong in the liberal position? Yes. Was he sometimes a crackpot? Yes. But you're asking a more fundamental question than that. So the question here is this, okay? The question that you got to ask this dude, the question you got to ask the person is this. How is it that you are comfortable with a guy who aligned with David Duke and wanted anarcho-capitalism, but anyone that offers a modest socialization initiative, modest social democratic reforms, or even social democratic reforms that exist in other countries like nationalization initiatives, are outside of the liberalism agenda? Meanwhile, don't you feel like your comfort with people such as this, considering them to be, banner holders for liberalism, has created this environment where The only people outside of this on the right are just like straightforward, currently active neo-Nazis. Liberalism for this person is basically everything but anti-capitalism. Okay? Everything but anti-capitalism. That's it. The tent is so vast, it's so large, it's so big that it features white supremacists. It features people who have, like I said, advocated for selling children on a marketplace. But while this, for someone like myself, is a perfectly apt descriptor of liberalism, this person is defending that, okay? I agree with that, but then you get mad at me and you say, what are you, Stalin? Like for claiming that the liberal confines are vast and it goes all the way to fucking David Duke. You get mad at me for saying that, but here's a guy who's a defender of it saying it, you know? Anyway. A perfect defense of liberalism, no notes. Yeah. But you're asking a more fundamental question than that, which is about whether there's continuity between some features of the liberal tradition and some forms of the illiberalism we have now. There's a sociological connection between some things that anti-liberals say and some things that certain liberals say. And that's because certain liberals were unfaithful to their liberalism. Real liberalism hasn't been tried. Once we really solve the freer the markets, the freer the people equation, it's going to be so good. Real liberalism hasn't been tried. The liberals who were also racist or sexist or spoke about groups of people in hateful ways were human beings who were insufficiently reflective of what their liberalism entailed. Now, how would we show that perspective is more accurate than saying that they were naturally illiberal? I think the answer to that is connected to the answer about why I wrote a book that I said almost nothing about contemporary illiberalism or contemporary politicians. It's a character failure on my part. I was just curious for your explanation regarding how we ended up where we are. I'm not saying that the conservative movement of 1980 or 1994 or 2012 was fated to become what it is today. I am, by the way. I don't care about what Isaac has to say here. I am saying that this is the natural, logical conclusion of reactionary politics. Reactionary politics always ends up with fascism. That is why there are so many similarities with the way that Nazis came into power and the politics that they demonstrated for their own respective time and their respective material circumstances and the politics of the modern Republican Party. Okay? That's it. It was always going to become exactly this. When I say character failure, I meant it more as a tendency to accentuate the positive, let's say. There is a form of right-of-center liberalism that is content with status hierarchies, that is very unhappy with anything that makes people feel reprimanded. Part of the emotional appeal of Reaganism was that there were left-of-center reprimands that seemed like an insult, an effort to inculcate shame, an effort to cast American history in a way that wasn't sufficiently celebratory. Is this clear? Oh, these guys got racist because the left was too fucking smarmy. That's what it is. Shit, they didn't. How is that any different than Donald Trump? This guy claims that he fucking hates Donald Trump. He must love what Donald Trump has been doing to the Smithsonian, I guess, because that's precisely what Donald Trump has been doing. Interesting. Interesting. These guys never find this endless need for compromise with their left flank. They only seem to find compromise with people further and further to their right. I wonder if it's because right-wing politics, no matter how far right you go, don't actually undermine the ultimate hierarchy that you are seeking to defend. Capitalism. It feels like This is just a consistent problem with liberalism. It feels like liberalism is yielding fascism in this country, and this is yet another glaringly obvious example of such. Here he is, openly revealing this position. You are saying political correctness drives people to be more right-wing? Some version of that. The Reagan-era attack on political correctness is very close. I think less enraged, but very close to the contemporary attack on woke. So woke and political correctness are basically the same thing. And to answer the question, how do we get here? I think William F. Buckley Jr. is partly an important figure and also partly diagnostic. His book on Yale, which identified anti-religion, anti-free markets as what Yale was defined by. Oh my God. William F. Buckley was also doing the Yale is fucking anti-free markets shit. Like, think about that. Yale, okay? A beacon of liberalism, a bastion of liberalism. Yale itself, okay? A hunting ground for the intelligence community, a scouting ground for the intelligence community. Yale itself is steeped with anti-free market principles. What a fucking ridiculous statement. Yeah, Yale, where Dick Cheney graduated. Yale, where George W. Bush, I believe. George W. Bush also graduated from Yale, right? Because his father, George H.W. Bush, actually bought a wing of the library, even though he didn't have the sufficient grades to go. Anyway, yeah, the Bushes were alumnus of Yale. Oh. What Yale defined by resonated for the Reagan people and it resonates for the Trump people. If you ask if Buckley's book is an illiberal book, I think the answer wouldn't be yes. The emphasis on free markets picks up on a liberal strand and celebrates it. Okay, dude, but do you ever maybe look at a guy who says, I love the free markets and think perhaps they're fucking stupid or crazy? Is there a guy who says, I like free markets and, for example, the free market of children, selling children? Does that not actually cut away from your assessment on maybe this person's mental sanity? Why is it that that's the secret code for someone such as yourself? As long as someone is for free markets, I'm on board. Don't you feel like this kind of allegiance making basically is the precise reason why liberalism is dying now? You know, because of the contradictions that are baked into capitalism, and liberalism's unyielding defense of the capitalist structure has created far too much animosity amongst one class over the other. The class contradictions are becoming more glaringly obvious, becoming more unavoidable. And in the process, people with no avenues of analyzing or interpreting the class battle that is taking place are finding themselves in the throes of reactionary sentiment, you know, in increasingly more illiberal ways. But as long as the free markets thrive, I don't think this guy gives a shit whether it's a fucking fascist form of governance like Pinochet. This person is a Harvard law professor, by the way. Anyway, but there was also with Buckley, in terms of race, things weren't good at all. He got better over time, but there were things that were horrifying. And with Reagan, too. When he was running for governor, he said that if an individual wants to discriminate against bleep or others in selling or renting his house, he has a right to do so. But it seems like you characterize right-wing or anti-democratic thought in America as a response to the modern left. We have a whole history. We had a civil war, segregation. There are all these moments in our history that had anti-liberal movements. I agree completely. So if the question is whether we attribute the rise of the right to political correctness and wokeness, that would be preposterous. Are they fuel? No. The reason is that you were alive, and as a right-winger and as a reactionary at the time, you didn't like the fucking wokeness. If you were alive in the civil rights struggle, if you lived your formative years in the civil rights struggle, if you personally were around during the Civil War, for example, you would have that exact same assessment. These people don't want the free market to thrive. They simply don't understand that chattel slavery is a formative part of the American economy, the industrial engine that runs this country. And it's also incredibly annoying that these woke lords are constantly coming in and telling me that black people are human beings. I don't like that. I don't like that one bit. I think the preservation of the status quo is incredibly important in order to make sure that free commerce continues. Okay? That's what he would say, because that's exactly what he's saying, adjusted to his own reflection of his own cultural movements that he has experienced. That's completely right. If we want to say that America's been imperfectly liberal country from early on, that's empathetically true. And by imperfectly liberal, the claim is that it shows imperfect fidelity to liberal principles that are shared by many on both the right and the left. And so you can make an argument today that the South has risen. And I don't mean to say that anything about particular Mississippi or Georgia, but to say that some of the thinking associated with the pro-slavery movements hasn't died. Yeah, maybe because we weren't illiberal enough in our ambition to stamp out the scourge of racial hierarchical thinking in the South, because the very same liberals that you probably admire totally capitulated to the right-wing psychopaths. Anyway, let's continue. I remember a column, praise John Brown. I think Sherman had a few things to say about that. Sherman didn't go far enough. All that stuff. Anyway, I remember a column you wrote in 2014 called Partyism Now Trumps Racism. It was about the problem of disliking people or responding to them differently based on the political party they belong to. But we do have a situation now where Trump tried to launch a coup. He failed, but half the country voted for him, and an entire political party is almost full of cultish devotees of him. As someone who has known a lot of Republicans in Washington for a long time and advocated for liberals to be more open-minded towards Republicans in many cases, I'm just curious how you think that through. Therein lies the ultimate betrayal. A liberal is so faceless. A liberal is so devoid of moral conviction beyond defending capitalism that you arrive at a thing that a liberal is supposed to care about the most, right? The destruction of the institutions that uphold this hierarchy, that have defended this hierarchy in perpetuity. The administration, the White House, the Capitol, these sacred grounds, right, that have historically defended free enterprise all around the world, right? When that historic franchise is desecrated by HVAC business owners, white supremacists that are coming from all around the country as they shit in Nancy Pelosi's desk and as they parade after beating the fuck out of the minimal amount of law enforcement that existed on that day, on January 6th, these guys still turn around and say, oh, well, what are you going to do about it? One of the best examples of this is with Charlie Kirk. A lot of people have focused on Charlie Kirk's racism, white supremacy, his misogyny, the consistent demands that like a wife is supposed to be servile to the interests of his master, the husband, all this shit, right? All this stuff is important to address for people like ourselves because we give a fuck about racism. We give a fuck about the humanity of black and brown people and trans people alike. Well, guess what? Liberals who can maybe turn a blind eye to those sorts of things because of their own personal point of privilege cannot turn a blind eye to the institutions being desecrated on January 6th. They love talking about January 6th. Well, lo and behold, a person who actually was responsible for January 6th directly offered material support and literally bust people in with the Turning Point USA on January 6th. Charlie Kirk is now being hailed as a bastion of liberalism, as a hero who simply wanted to engage in spirited debate by the very same liberals who were in shock that January 6th took place, in shock that there could be an internal movement in this country that could desecrate the halls of Congress. Charlie Kirk was a January 6th warrior. So even in that sense, these guys have no institution that they will defend beyond capitalism. Do you understand? That's something that I'll never understand about Ezra Klein. Like, I made fun of January 6th. You didn't. You thought it was the most pivotal event in American history. You acted like it was liberal 9/11, okay? And then you turn around and look at the Muhammad Atta of January 6th and you go, that's a great guy. It doesn't make sense to me. I can say that if I want to because I don't really give a shit about January 6th. I thought it was funny, okay? You don't. This is a direct stain on American liberal democracy, and they shat on it, both literally and figuratively, and you are celebrating one of the fucking guys who did it. What the fuck? How can you expect me to care if you clearly don't? Anyway, let's get back to it. What's going on is, on the other hand, mysterious, and on the other hand, straightforward. What's going on is, on the one hand, mysterious, and on the other hand, straightforward. What's straightforward is that on the part of many Republicans, the thinking is, if we do anything that's inconsistent with what we see as the zeitgeist, we're going to lose our jobs and we might get shot. It's very wrong to underestimate the level of fear. Some of the Republicans with whom I worked as recently as 2024 agree with President Trump on many substantive issues like cutting taxes, cutting regulation, getting better control of the border. There were many things that they didn't agree with him on, such as January 6th. See? And didn't agree with him with respect to going after political enemies. It's this that makes every liberal turn a blind eye to this. Do you understand? This is the problem at the heart of the fucking Democratic Party as well, because the Democrats also represent this way of thinking. Okay? That's it. Because you are so predisposed with tax cuts, cutting regulation, getting better control over the border, and numerous other things that Republicans are doing, that you don't mind when they do all this other shit. You don't mind when they keep consistently upping the ante. You don't even care about the values that you supposedly espouse. This is why liberalism is dying. Okay? Republicans en masse could have voted for someone who wanted to cut taxes and regulations in the 2024 primary. There were a lot of candidates who were pro-life and in favor of low taxes, and Trump still overwhelmingly won the primary. There's something that's straightforward, which is fear. My emphasis on freedom from fear in the book was not unrelated to observing people who are not free from fear. There's also the extent of to which people behind closed doors will say certain things about the current president, but not say those things out loud. Do you have faith that the Supreme Court is currently committed to liberalism? Yeah. Steam is up. Very important. Please check log. Thank you for the update, chatter. Yeah, I think the Supreme Court is committed not to leftist liberalism by any means, but basically to liberalism. They all believe in freedom of speech. Pfft. Okay. They all highly committed to the freedom of religion. Oh, okay. Pluralism is something they embrace. Oh, okay. I do think that the court in general, the Chief Justice in particular, is in a really rare situation with the President of the United States potentially disregarding it. So what the justices have done recently cannot be fully explained, except by reference to a perception on the part of some that we have to tread very cautiously here, because the court as an institution is more vulnerable than it has been in maybe 100 years. But you believe that all 9 justices are committed to liberalism of the sort that you outline in your book and are trying to uphold it? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm not going to name any names, but there's a conservative judge who did read the first couple of chapters of the book and did say, I agree with all of this. Fucking idiots. Jesus Christ. All of them. The craziest part is these are incredibly well-read individuals, okay? These are incredibly well-read individuals. They're brilliant individuals, okay? They write a lot. They read a lot. But when you have horse blinders on, when you have lost the capacity to dream, when you have lost the capacity to look at everything that you have defended your entire life as maybe being wrong, you will stunt your growth. Your intellectual capacity is stunted, okay? The problem is these guys actually do have room for growth, but in the rightward direction, which is precisely the reason why so many liberals find themselves in the throes of reactionary politics like this, or at least find themselves aligning with reactionary politics like this, because there is a limit. There is a limit to how far left they can go. They will never go beyond abolishing or even reconstructing capitalism. They will never go beyond, they will never look at capitalism from a critical lens, because that is the established norm and it will forever continue. Okay? This is why I think it's easier in many respects to explain to younger people, and I don't mean like, fucking 12-year-olds or whatever. I mean just like well-read individuals who haven't already calcified in their worldview after getting so much social conditioning to imagine a world outside of capitalism as like anything but death and fucking destruction and chaos. Okay? Please talk to 36,000 viewers about the flotilla being attacked. There were 40,000 people watching half an hour ago. There have been 8 explosions now and 7 boats hit. Why are you pocket watching? Why are you view count watching? I said I'm going to get to it when there is more information. Okay? Wow. I would just say that I find it very hard to believe, especially with Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas, who seem to me to be kind of out and out partisan Trump supporters. This is completely fair to question. Alito is an extremely careful lawyer and a very precise judge. He is clearly taken with a certain view of our culture that is shared by many Trump supporters. But is it possible to find an opinion in which he says, I'm going to go this way because the president is the law, or anything verges on that? I think that's very hard to find. Oh, he never said it outright. You know what this is? This is has he said the N-word, therefore he's not racist, of interpreting legal scholarship. Okay? That is crazy. What a brilliant mind this guy is. Harvard Law, by the way. Wow, he did not specifically write, like, I'm doing this because I love Donald Trump and Donald Trump wants me to do this. It almost feels like the entire conservative interpretation of the Constitution kind of leans on finding new academic interpretations of the Constitution in an effort to make it work with whatever contemporary demands a Republican president is making, don't you think? I don't know. Isn't that at the very heart of every different kind of legal scholarship that demands a reactionary position on a constitution that's supposed to be a living, breathing document? Anyway, is there anything in his opinions that shows disrespect for freedom of speech or freedom from religion? I think that's impossible to find. Thomas is an originalist. He's the most committed originalist on the court who believes the Constitution should be understood in accordance with its original meaning. Yeah. I don't like that view much, but you can hold that view and be liberal in a sense of believing in the rule of law, believing in freedom of speech. He does not want to overrule New York Times v. Sullivan, but he's not the only liberal who thinks that, and that doesn't make him illiberal. That decision from 1964 raised the standard for defamation lawsuits in a way that is seen as crucial to press freedom. So I do agree with you. There are concerning things about the political connections that appear, but in terms of liberal tradition, I'm not giving up on Justice Thomas. Oh, okay, so I should believe you. You may be the most hopeful man in America. You mentioned in the book that one of the key components of liberalism is human rights. I am thinking a lot about the Reagan administration policy, especially in places like Latin America, and wondering whether you think the conservative movement has broadly believed in human rights. I think one critique of liberalism from people on the left is that liberalism is complacent about imperialism specifically. Remember, he was a Reagan lawyer. Okay, so you're right to press on human rights. I would single out as the holy trinity of freedom, pluralism, and the rule of law. I do refer to human rights as a part of what liberals are committed to. You can believe in human rights while disagreeing about what falls in that category. Oh my God. He said, human rights is fine. He just wrote it out on the spot. That is liberalism through and fucking through. Just, all right, I don't really care about that much. But here, a second ago, he's talking about like how crucial it is, how much it is a fundamental part. How much is a fundamental part of liberalism? One question, and he goes, it's fine. As you say in the first sentence of the chapter 1 in your book, liberals believe in 6 things: freedom, human rights, pluralism, security, the rule of law, and democracy. So I put democracy and human rights there, and I believe it to be true. But there have been liberals in history who are, let's say, ambiguous in their enthusiasm for democracy. Some people say you could have a liberal society that isn't democratic. I disagree with that. In my view, democracy is a condition for liberalism, but liberals sharply disagree about what's included in the category of human rights. You might think there's a right to an education, as Roosevelt did. I certainly do. And other liberals would say that's a policy that's probably good, but there's no right to it. Now, on imperialism generally, the question is, what does it mean exactly? Harvard law professor. You know what imperialism is, you fucking asshole. You literally work with Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama, okay? You know what it is. But again, his bag relies on him being oblivious to this term, okay? Notice how the 6 fundamental principles of liberalism can also be argued away in a mere moment with the first sign of pushback. What do you believe? Fucking nothing. Fucking nothing at all. Just power and being in proximity to power. And also, more importantly than anything else, free markets. The freer the markets, the freer the people. I can't believe that in one back and forth interview, this man has literally explained away exactly why he is a little bit of a fascist. Just like one slip, cut a liberal and a fascism and a fascist bleeds. The back and forth conversation right here. If it means the United States interferes illegally with the activities of other nations, to say the least, there should be a presumption of a very strong form against that. This debate about what should really be included when we think about human rights, that wasn't what was going on with Reagan. The Reagan administration would laud any dictator that it liked and garland them with praise. By the way, this is not exclusive to Ronald Reagan. Every single administration has done that, but that's neither here nor there. That's not, he just worked with Reagan, so he's hitting him on the Reagan stuff. And he also brought up Reagan as a liberal, as a bastion of liberalism in the book. I hear you. So here you have a clash between human rights enthusiasts who are cautious about making what they see as undue compromise for the sake of alliances, and others who think that you can make temporary compromises of liberal principles for the sake of obtaining alliances that might ensure that people's rights are protected in the long term. Like with Pinochet, protected Chile's rights to free markets in the long term, whether the Chilean population wanted it or not. It doesn't matter. Oh, were you going on a helicopter ride with no return where they would dump your body into the fucking water? Well, guess what? That's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Do you understand? I'm willing to make that sacrifice because as long as the markets still fucking flow, then I'm good with that. Me, I'm kind of a human rights casual fan. Yeah. Temporary compromises. What about long-standing compromises? And I feel I have kind of a division of labor within my family on that one, and I defer to spouse. Your spouse, I defer to spouse. Your spouse being Samantha Power? Wait. He's married to Samantha Power. Oh my God, I didn't know this. I defer that to that human rights advocate who is also a realist. Power became famous in the 1990s for her journalistic work on issues of human rights and was seen as an idealist. She later served in the Obama administration as a UN ambassador and in the Biden administration as a head of USAID. You can defer to her. I was just asking because you put it in the first sentence. I didn't know that. All I meant by human rights was some category of fears that are walled off from government intrusion. If you say, I believe in freedom of speech, freedom of religion, private property, freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures, and I don't believe in Social Security, I don't believe in a right to a home, I don't believe in a right to be free from discrimination, I don't believe in a right to education, then you can still be a liberal. Samantha Power, bastion of liberalism and free rights, freedom and human rights. Anyway, let's continue. In terms of human rights, I've always found it a little bit puzzling, given what you write and given who your wife is, that you two were so close to Henry Kissinger. Of all the pre-Trump political figures in America, he is the one I think of in some ways as the opposite of liberal, given his behavior towards the rest of the world. Anyone that talks about Henry Kissinger that isn't Chinese, I will always scrutinize, okay? Henry Kissinger was far from the norm when it comes to American empire. Certainly not. But he is the most appropriate beacon of anger. Everybody fucking hates Henry Kissinger, hated Henry Kissinger, may he rest in piss. So he was like the most appropriate target for even liberals, right? with the exception of the Chinese. The Chinese, I put them in a totally separate category. They understandably will always respect Henry Kissinger for obvious reasons, okay? Let's be real. He was a little bit of a Maoist. Him and Nixon were principled Maoists, and they were committed to the People's Republic of China and unlock the potential of the People's Republic of China and have created this unlimited prosperity that we enjoy now, okay? Henry Kissinger was Chinese. That's besides the point. I'm not gonna dive into that. But anyone who is not Chinese who says they like Henry Kissinger, what the fuck do you believe? Your bias is showing. Hasan, the new people won't understand the joke. Henry Kissinger did a lot for China. Okay? That's it. He did a lot for China. Yes, Henry Kissinger walked so Xi Jinping could run. Anyway, we'll talk about that later, okay? Just hold on. I'll tell you a story. I wrote a book a few years ago on Star Wars. We invited Dr. Kissinger to my Star Wars book party, and he said, "You wrote a book about Star Wars. Why'd you write a book about Star Wars?" He was puzzled and courteous, but really confused. And then he came to the book party, which was quite generous. He was a busy person. "Oh, so you like Henry Kissinger because he likes you and he was kind to you. But despite his busyness, he came to the book party." Yeah. And then I gave a talk on Star Wars, and he came up to me afterwards and he says, "Oh, I see why you wrote a book on Star Wars. There's a lot there. It's like about families, and it's about governments and freedom." The amount of curiosity and generosity that you show was incomparable. I don't know anyone who showed that level of curiosity. He's like, guys, Adolf Hitler was a misunderstood figure. A lot of people hate him, but honestly, he was a real great guy to have at parties. Okay. He did this thing where he would take a peanut and put it in his mouth and then spit it in the air and then catch it with his mouth. It was a real great party trick. So obviously, despite the millions of people that he fucking slaughtered, okay, he was kind to me. And you don't know the Adolf that I know. Okay. Yeah. Bill Maher meeting Donald Trump. This guy talking about Henry Kissinger. It doesn't matter how many deaths he contributed to. It ultimately doesn't matter. Okay. And we really got into Star Wars. He just wanted to think about it. I know there are strong views about his career, and I'm hardly an expert on his career, but your wife is one of the great human rights experts in the world. I asked you about him being anti-liberal, and your response that he was very nice to you about your book, about Star Wars. It is certainly a touching story, but that's not totally an answer to the question. Yeah, well, I don't know. What he would think of this book, I'd love to know. But no second thoughts about being friends with him or anything? I feel generally very grateful for friendship, and he was. When I knew him as a person of immense kindness, those who think of him as someone who was something horrible or worse, I don't know what to say about that. But you could have an opinion on it. You have an opinion on all kinds of things, right? Well, on him and his role in the government, that's not something I've particularly studied, so I don't know. I know some people who think he was a horrible historic figure. They would say, would you be friends with Genghis Khan? Would you be friends with Stalin? And I wouldn't be friends with Stalin, so I concede that. Wait. Motherfucker said he wouldn't be friends with Stalin before Genghis Khan, bro. I'm telling you. Wait, even Isaac Chotiner gets short with him here. Look, he goes, well, the next time someone brings up a terrible anecdote about Cambodia or Vietnam, I will definitely drop the Star Wars story to show that people have two sides. Just fucking blistered him. Also, I need to go back to this quote. Would you be friends with Genghis Khan? Would you be friends with Stalin? And I wouldn't be friends with Stalin, so I concede that. That is a crazy thing to say. So, like, Genghis Khan, the great annihilator, right? Like, I'm Turkish, so it's a little different from my perspective, okay? But, like this is this is like a franchise pick, okay, for evil guy. I mean, he literally redefined the planet. He redefined the maps, okay? And this motherfucker goes, Stalin, that's a bad guy. Genghis Khan, don't know if I would be friends with him or not. Probably would be friends with him, okay? But not Stalin. like in his mind, if you ask this guy dead ass straight up, pick one. You have one bullet, okay? You have one bullet in the gun, chambered. You're in a room with Adolf Hitler and you're in a room with Joseph Stalin. Who do you kill? I know for a fact he'd kill Stalin. 100%. 1,000,000%. He'd be like, yeah, I got to kill Stalin. I mean, come on. One is far more consequential. That's guys, you don't understand. Hitler had a lot of illiberal tendencies, but the things that he did in terms of collaborating with the business interests of Germany, well, that was pretty liberal, okay? Hitler also said, the freer the market, the freer the people, and he kind of made up for the lack of enthusiasm in the labor force by forcing them to work. Remember, work sets you free? That's a concept that liberals can get on board with. Oh my God. Incredible. Yeah, and wait, by the way, this was the most insane line. Well, the next time someone brings up a terrible anecdote about Cambodia or Vietnam, I will definitely drop the Star Wars story about to show that people have two sides. Yeah, and I get those who think you shouldn't be friends with someone who did terrible things. I hear that. I can just say that he was, as a very large number of people would say, though many fewer people would say it publicly, an extraordinarily generous friend. Professor, thank you so much for doing this. Great, thanks. If we go light on the Kissinger part, I wouldn't complain because it could dwarf everything else. Oh, he left that in there too. A Harvard constitutional scholar on Star Wars and the Supreme Court. The Harvard law professor and constitutional scholar on what Star Wars can tell us about today's Supreme Court. Fucking amazing. The funniest part about this is that Sunstein has spent his entire life being such an obsequious toady to everyone around him. He's incapable of realizing how badly him and his stupid book are being insulted. Yeah, I actually cannot comprehend how he left that in there. I mean, or how he didn't understand that this was like incredibly, this was a blistering critical hit. Wow. Like that, how do you not see that this person is straight up talking to you and shitting on you directly to your face? Is he that fucking oblivious to what Henry Kissinger did? As a communications professional, my guidance is that when Isaac Chotiner requests an interview, you should go into witness protection. Yeah, I mean, we glaze him a little bit, but like he does have unimaginable access for some reason. And when people call, when he calls motherfuckers up, they just straight up talk to him. I don't understand it. Yeah, but it might work for us. I mean, me, something of a legend, like I'm Badger Vance or a superhero, Captain Underpants. Chotiner, I stand corrected. Your Drake impression is quite good, and I don't believe anyone could honestly call it offensive. So stupid. What is this? Fuck your mods. Fuck having a community like this with no action towards anything other than complaining. I would hope you actually would move people to be activists, as this is your main message supposedly about what you do. What happened? Did you get banned for something and now you're complaining? Because that's not activism. Oh, it's this. Oh my God. Dude. You got a 30-second timeout because we're not covering the flotilla until we actually get to this. And like you make it seem as though this is the most devastating hit. This betrays what this community set out to do. Anyway, earlier today, Israel, or yesterday, Israel straight up came out and fucking said, I don't know what this shit is on the side, but Israel straight up came out and fucking said that the flotilla that was slated to reach the shores of Gaza was actually Hamas. Obviously, this is a change in attitude. It actually went from this is a selfie ship that shouldn't be taken seriously to this is actually now a Hamas ship. And now you already know when they call something Hamas, that means they're going to kill them. Loud explosions have now been heard near the Sumud flotilla fleet. A reporter on board on one of the flotilla ships is reporting that there has been a loud explosion near the fleet while drones fly overhead. The Marine VHF radios of the ships